Hey everybody, good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Welcome to Beekeeping for Newbees. Thank you so very much for taking the time to listen. I do appreciate you. And I want to say thank you to everybody who sent out happy Easter messages and for all of you for faithfully tuning in every week, and especially you, my favorite listener. Thank you so much for being there. All right, today is episode 145. Is my colony queenless, and how do I tell, and what do I do? Now you might be saying to yourself, I think Jeff did these episodes in the reverse order. This episode probably should have come before the last one of when and how to requeen a hive. Let me explain why I did this in this order, because in my mind, I wanted to go through all the methods which both the bees and you might requeen the hive first. So specifically, how they can make queens or how you can introduce them. I felt like it was kind of a good foundation to have in the back of your memory as we started talking about what to do with suspected queenless hive, because for me, which I recognize that I'm a little weird and I have some challenges in my brain housing group, but if I were listening to an episode on what to do if I suspect my colony had lost their queen, I may have gotten fixated on worrying about what I'm actually going to do, that I might have missed the messaging and the reasons kind of why I'm doing it, which is what we're going to talk about here in this episode. I'm not sure if that's the best approach, but hopefully it works out for everybody. Now, armed with the info of the last episode, let's jump in and talk first about all the things that could actually happen resulting in the loss, death, or general absence of your queen. And then we'll talk about a few things that could happen that may make you think she's gone when in fact everything's okay. Things that could mimic an absent or failed queen. One thing that can happen is you can have a colony that will swarm. And you have a new virgin queen. She's emerged from a queen cell, and she's just out being mated. Now, in that scenario, so you open the hive up, and this is where it's really difficult and challenging for new beekeepers, because there's so many things that are going on, and you have no idea, and you're trying to focus on the basics, and you're trying not to get stung, and you're going through all these, just everything is new. And trying to have this in your mind, like, okay, I see this now, I'm going to do that. These are things that kind of take muscle memory. You kind of have to do them over and over and over again to where it becomes instinctive. And unfortunately, it's just a time thing that you're going to have to log. But you open the hive up, you're looking around, you're like, okay, well, I see a lot of bees. Everything looks okay. And then it goes back to, okay, what are the basics of our inspection? What are we looking for every time we open the hive? So you open up and you're looking around for eggs and young larvae. I always like to see that, like I've mentioned many times before. Just because you don't see the queen doesn't mean she isn't there. And it doesn't mean that everything isn't going just fine. By finding those eggs and larvae, she's been there pretty recently. Like I said, eggs are within the past couple of days. Larvae might be 4 or 5 days, up to maybe 9 days or so before that brood is capped. So those will give you some really good indicators. But you open up the hive, you're doing an inspection, and you don't see any eggs anywhere. So the first thing is make sure you're looking everywhere. I would generally tell you to start towards the middle. That's where brood is typically going to be raised. But that doesn't mean that's the only place. So if you look in the middle and you don't see anything, keep working to the outsides. If you have to go through every single frame, just if that's what you got to do, then that's what you got to do. But make sure you confirm there are definitely no eggs. After you've done that, I need you to really look closely. And again, this is one of those things where the more you do it, you'll be doing them in tandem. You won't do things as single tasks. You'll have 20 different tasks in your mind that you can kind of multitask. I also want you looking for queen cells, whether they are closed queen cells, open queen cells, not yet capped, whatever the status might be. You might have a queen cup. There's a number of different statuses or statuses. You could have a queen cell in a variety of different states. Let's just say that. But let's say you did open the hive and you're doing your inspection. There's no eggs at all, but you find 5 or 6 queen cells, and one of them is open from the bottom. Well, if the queen cell is open from the bottom, that's where the new queen has emerged. Now, at that point, I probably would just walk away. As long as everything else is kind of going okay in the hive, just close it up, walk away, come back in a week. Because what that tells me is that queen has already emerged, and she's already done what she needed to do within the hive to eliminate other queens. And, she still needs a couple of days to reach sexual maturity, to go out, to get mated, to come back, to start laying. You're at least a week out. So close everything back up, update your notes, and check again in a week. That's what I would do in that situation. Now, another scenario that could arise is if you have a period of dearth, you may not see any eggs. Now, this is, I wish somebody would have thrown this little nugget my way years ago when I was first starting out, because I have a dearth every year. It's usually around the first week of June. There's just nothing. The bees have nothing to eat, and that's where we got to keep a really close eye, consider supplemental feeding. I like to move them to my property in North Carolina where there's still some forage. But during a dearth, the queen might still say, hey, I'm the queen. I'm going to go lay eggs. And the nurse bees will nod their heads and be like, yeah, cool, have at it. And then she walks away, and then they cannibalize the eggs. The nurse bees are the ones who are in charge of saying, what resources are coming in? Oh, nothing? Okay, well, we're going to eat these eggs. So the queen is laying, and she's active, and you open up and look in, you're like, oh my God, there's no eggs. I must be queenless. I have done this before. I have introduced new queens before and had them get bald. I've gone and gotten frames of open brood before, hoping that the colony would raise a queen and make a queen cell, and they didn't. And I just thought, oh, geez, what's going on? So this is one you really got to pay attention to, and you have to understand this goes back to, kind of colony dynamics. The colony will raise brood when there is food available and there is food coming in. If that food source goes away, whether it's a natural or a synthetic food source, right? And you may be feeding them pollen patties and sugar syrup and different things. If you are giving them those resources, they will continue to rear brood, continue to draw comb, and continue doing stuff bees do. But just be aware that just because you don't see eggs, it doesn't mean that you're queenless. So I want to go through a couple of common things here that could have happened to your queen. So the queen could have been crushed or injured during an inspection. Now, those first dozen or so inspections are a little bit awkward. And my recommendation to you is, especially for someone who's like, well, I'm thinking about being a beekeeper, I'm not really sure yet, I'm on the fence. I really recommend doing mock inspections. And this is something I've been meaning to do a video on. Oh God, I'm so far behind on that. But what I mean by a mock inspection is I mean like putting your gear on, going out to all the hive equipment and everything that you have ready to go that you're going to be using with the real bees when they get there. And I want you to walk through an inspection. So I'm going to make a note here. I'm going to do that video this week. I will do a mock inspection video. I will try to find all of my gear to put it on. If nothing else, I'll at least have a veil or something on to kind of walk you through. But I will show you exactly what I'm going to do on blank hardware with no bees in it, just for a starting, kind of a good starting point so you know what to do. I highly encourage you to do that just to kind of get used to the mechanics of what you're doing. It will be different when you're doing your actual inspections. You will be dealing with bees that could potentially get angry. You will be dealing with propolized frames. Everything is going to get sticky. It's a different world, but you'll at least have some basics of what you should and maybe shouldn't be doing. So I will definitely get that video done this week. But like I mentioned, those first dozen or so inspections are pretty awkward. Just kind of trying to get your feet wet and figuring out where things should be and how they should be done. And you're thinking about, did I get my gear on the right way? And I want to make sure I don't get stung. And then you're, like I said, you're dealing with the propolis, and then you also don't want to get stung. And you're trying to find the queen, and you on the side of that, you probably still don't want to get stung. I remember that. I remember just being like hyper focused on, I'm going to get stung, I'm going to get stung, I'm going to get stung. I get it. I absolutely do. But just take your time. Don't rush through that inspection, especially when it's brand new. You got a brand new package or a brand new nuke. If you've taken the nuke and you put them into, let's say, a 10 frame hive, you've got time. They're not going to swarm on you on day 2 or day 10 or whatever. If you have to break that first inspection up a little bit and do it over the course of every other day, like let's say that you go in to do the inspection and you're having some trouble, you're not feeling good about things, close it up, walk away. Come back a couple days later. Don't bother them every day. Don't be in there trying to inspect them every single day. But if you have a tough day on that first day, come back in 2 or 3 days and try again. But also try to stack the odds in your favor too, right? Pick a day where the temperature, if you're talking Fahrenheit, you want to probably be over about 70 degrees. Fahrenheit will put you in a kind of an optimal scenario. You don't want to have it rainy and overcast, and sometimes being excessively windy can mess things up. Make sure your smoker's working and it's lit well and you've got all those things in place. Do everything you can to stack the odds in your favor for a successful inspection. So another thing that can happen is, let's say that you order a package of bees and that queen doesn't actually get released from the cage, and she is dead. Now you're thinking, well, that doesn't make any sense. Why would the queen be dead? I mean, she's a brand new queen. They shouldn't dislike her. There are scenarios where, for whatever reason, something is wrong with that queen. They don't like her and they don't want her to be their queen. It would be ideal if they would at least let her get some things in place to make a new queen, but sometimes they don't. What happened in my case is I had a package of bees show up. Now, if you know anything about how these packages are made, it's basically an assembly line. They're going to take a whole lot of frames, and these frames are full of bees, and they're shaking these bees into these shaker boxes. And usually at the bottom, there's a queen excluder, and the bees are kind of going through the queen excluder. That's the way that I've done the couple of them that I did years ago. But you're shaking them down so that they're going through the queen excluder so that you don't have queens in there. Some places, I think they just do it manually. They just go through and manually take out the queens and then do all the shaking of the bees. But essentially, you end up with this massive container of just workers, basically. And they go in, take a couple of scoops out, whatever number of bees they need to get to their 3 pounds, and they pass to the next person. That person, drops in the queen cage, staples it, pass to the next person. They drop in the can of sugar syrup, throw the top one, staple, pass to the next person, and it's just kind of a nice little assembly line. Well, somehow a queen got mixed into that. So I had a colony that showed up in a package, queen bee moving around inside, and then also in the cage was another queen. So I installed the package as normal. I hung the queen cage the way I usually do, came back 3 days later, and I got a dead queen in the package. Now, I can't remember what year this was. This is probably like year 2 or 3. I don't know. And I called the people. I'm like, hey, man, your queen's dead. And they were like, yeah, don't worry about it. There's probably another queen in there. And I was thinking, no, there's not. Why would there be another queen? That doesn't make any sense. So they told me, they said, look, just leave it alone. Wait a week. If you don't see any eggs or anything in the next week, call us back. And I said, okay. And sure enough, that's exactly what happened. So they decided to go ahead and keep the queen that was already with them. So that is something that could happen to a queen in a cage like that. So be mindful of that. Now, a very common thing that happens is the colony will swarm. They take their original queen with them, and the new queen has either not emerged, so maybe there's a queen cell that's in there, swarm cell in there somewhere. The queen just has not yet emerged, and you need to find that. In fact, that would be a good idea to go through and make sure you don't have like 20 of them. Go ahead and go through and pick maybe your 2 or 3 best ones, and then go ahead and get rid of the excess queen cells. But go through and look around and make sure and see if any of them have already been opened. It's possible that your new virgin queen is out being mated. She could be running around inside the hive. That they're not marked, and when they're not mated, they tend to be smaller and more lightweight, which kind of makes sense. They need to be flying around. When you compare a newly born virgin queen in her body size to a mated laying queen, there's a big difference in their appearance. That new virgin queen needs to be light, aerodynamic, and needs to be able to fly, whereas the more robust, I don't know what the nice word to say is, the laying queen needs to be outfitted for productivity, and she needs to be healthy. I'm trying to say this in a way that doesn't get anybody angry at me. So if that virgin queen is out on her mating flight, obviously you're not going to see her in the hive. The only evidence you would see would be an open queen cell somewhere, so I would recommend looking for that before they tear down those old cells. In that case, and you probably should also notice a reduction in the population as well. I mean, if you've been keeping up with inspections and maybe you just, you missed the queen cells and they swarmed on you, you should still know, like, wow, this colony was significantly larger a couple weeks ago. Good indication that may have happened. Close everything up, come back in a week, and just kind of check again. Now, less often, or I guess I should say more rare, a queen can become ill. She can be sick. Something can happen with her. She could be failing for whatever reason, and they may have preemptively dispatched her, expecting a new queen to emerge, and replace her from a cell that was already available. They may have made a supersedure cell, or they maybe had been planning to swarm already, and for whatever reason, there should be a queen cell available, and you probably saw the queen cell and said, well, Jeff told us to get rid of excess queen cells if I see my queen, so we went ahead and took them out. But you're always welcome to blame me if you need to have an out. I don't mind being the fall guy, but that's what I would do too. If I see a queen and she looks healthy and there's a cell in there, I would be instinctively inclined to say, well, this is a cell that needs to be removed because I have a queen. And that's where you got to step back and say, okay, do I see like 1 or 2 cells in the middle of a frame at kind of a random time of year? Or do I see 7, 8, 9 cells, throughout the multiple frames during swarm season? Because that's a good indicator. When you see 1 or 2 and it's, the middle of the frame, bottom of the frame, I just don't like people to get too wrapped up on that one because supersedure cells do tend to be in the middle of the frame. Okay, here's a better way to say this. Swarm cells and supersedure cells both happen on frames, and there's a small area of overlap where they could both happen in the middle. Okay, so you generally would expect to see a supersedure cell more towards the middle, swarm cells more towards the bottom of the frames, but also swarm cells can be literally all over the place, right? Where you see as being the middle might not be where they see being the middle or the top or the bottom. So don't just go on location alone. The total number of them is an indicator as well. Time of year is a good indicator. If you saw a supersedure cell in my place where I am, where there's nothing going on in June or July, and you saw a random queen cell, it's probably not a swarm cell, right? There's probably something else wrong with the queen. So if they detect something wrong with the queen, they're going to try to replace her via supersedure cell. Keep your eyes open for those. If you see just 1 or 2 by themselves, think about the idea that there may actually be something wrong with that queen. In that case, if you're not sure, right, you can always ask somebody or ask a friend, ask a mentor, ask me. But if you're not positive with that, you can always go ahead and say, look, I'm going to go ahead and synthetically swarm this colony. I'm going to move this queen and a couple of frames of bees over to a small nuke off to the side, let the other one emerge, and let her go get mated. And I'm going to run these two, in conjunction with each other here temporarily, just to make sure everything is okay. If you have that little nuke and they start making another supersedure cell over there, you're like, okay, there's obviously something wrong with her. And now you've already got your replacement queen in place. Or you could just preemptively, requeen, just go ahead and get, through whatever process, whether it's a mated queen or any of the other options we discussed in the previous episode. You could definitely do that and just preemptively replace her and be done with it. I know that might not be very clear because there's a lot of moving parts with that. So I guess I would say that the key takeaway there is if you think it's a supersedure cell, and usually only being 1 or 2 cells, that might be a time to actually let them replace her because they're not going to swarm. So now the next question is, okay, well, cool. How do I know if it's a swarm cell or a supersedure cell? And that's another one of those time experience kind of things. Now, another scenario that could happen is a Varroa treatment gone bad. Now, I do like formic acid. It is a bit aggressive, but you need to. There are times where you have to use a more aggressive treatment when you have higher mite counts and mite loads. You got to get more aggressive. You can be somewhere where you're using oxalic acid, which is my kind of go-to for a Varroa treatment. It is not aggressive enough to really knock down high mite count. When you have numbers, I would say anything probably above 12, 10, 12, double-digit numbers, you probably need to get a little bit more aggressive because they will get out of control very, very quickly. Now, the thing with formic acid is it's very effective and it's very safe to use in bees. The trick is when it's used by the instructions. You have to pay particular attention to the temperature range with which it can be used. If you do that, highly effective. If you don't do that, you can have experience. I've had a lot of people that talk to me with experiences around losing their queens, losing half the colony. Significantly bad things have happened. And a lot of that comes back to the ventilation and not having adequate ventilation. It gets too hot. Again, make sure you're following the directions and checking the temperature range for the duration of the treatment. It's not just what's the temperature range that day. So this is not necessarily going to be the best thing to do if you're in a northern climate in March or April. You may need to wait until May or June until things stabilize a little bit. I do want to go back. There was something I meant to mention earlier and I forgot about it, but it's kind of a little bit of a fun fact when we talk about multiple virgin queens emerging in a hive. There's this idea we have that you have potentially 2, 3, 4, a whole bunch of these virgin queens emerging at one time, and there's this big battle royal. It looks like one of those cage matches from the old WWF wrestling days or whatever. a lot of times what will happen is as these virgin queens are emerging, there are, of course, they have their natural scent, their behavior, other cues. The colony will generally make a choice fairly early on and say, like, this is our queen. And what they will do is they will protect her. They will sometimes hold the other queens while the queen is attacking them. They will sometimes take out the other queens themselves. So it's not just, okay, one queen versus the other, let's see who wins. Quite often the colony is very actively involved in that process. So I thought I would share that with you as kind of an interesting little tidbit. So another scenario is you do a walk-away split, and you assume that they're going to raise a queen as they should, but maybe they didn't have any viable eggs or young larvae, or even worse, you did the split. You thought the queen was in one colony, so you put your new mated queen in the other one, but it turns out the queen was actually in that one, and then they fought it out, and now you're back to one queen in two colonies. You could also have a scenario where you installed a swarm that you caught, assuming that there was a queen in there, but there wasn't. I actually had this happen to me. I was getting ready to go to the airport for a customer meeting I had to go to in another city. And I watched this swarm fly. I think I was loading my luggage or loading things into my car, getting ready to leave. I had about 20 or 30 minutes to spare. And I hear this buzzing going by my head, probably 20, 30 feet up in the air. Swarm went right past me, landed on my neighbor's tree. I texted them. I'm like, hey, a swarm of bees just landed in your front yard. Do you mind if I grab them? And they were like, yeah, absolutely. Have at it. So I went out there and I did as much as I could in the 20 minutes that I had. Got them thrown into a box, and I didn't get the queen. I missed her. So I had the colony out there for a couple of weeks, and I kept checking to make sure, and then ultimately ended up just merging them in with another colony once we realized we didn't have the queen. But, it can definitely happen, and that can be another scenario. Now, another kind of less likely, you have a friend who says, hey, listen, I got a little bit of a bind I'm in. Do you happen to have a frame with some open brood? I need to make a queen. And you're like, hey, no problem. I'll give you a frame of mine because I'm a team player and I'm looking out for you. You give them that frame. And, of course, mama's on the frame. And you give her away to your friend. And your friend, like a week later, is like, oh, it's amazing. They got this mated queen and she's doing great. So that is a scenario that could happen. So again, keeping notes of everything, because if you're keeping notes and then you're like, man, I don't know what happened. My queen's gone. Then you go back and look at the notes and you say, oh, geez, I did give the neighbor that frame the other day, and he said that he's got a mated queen. Ask him what color her marking is, right? If she's already marked, that could be a good indicator as well. So we talked a lot about things that are real, like real areas where you've lost your queen, but when we kind of integrated some things in there that are some false alarms too, but I want to go back and just highlight those individually to make sure we know the differences between real, like queen loss, and some things that might be temporary. So again, to recap, swarm aftermath, right? A virgin queen is present. She's not mated, and that's why you don't see any new eggs. So she's just out, doing her thing, getting her groove on and getting mated so that she can get back to work. You have seasonal breaks because of a dearth. So that's, again, a scenario that's very probable, very likely in a lot of areas. She's there. Everything's okay. She's just, the eggs are just being cannibalized and they're not being raised into new young brood. Anytime you have a young queen, basically, whether it's a supersedure, whether it's a virgin queen that is emerged from a queen cell, you're always going to have this timeline. It's basically that 1 week where she emerges, she reaches sexual maturity, another 5-7 days, sometimes even a little bit longer, to go out and get mated. And then you have, a couple more days for her to start laying eggs and getting things going. So realistically, 3 to 4 weeks with no new eggs, no cat brood is not, an unrealistic time frame. And I want to remind you again, too, especially if you've allowed them to requeen via whatever method that they've done, whether via, it doesn't matter from your perspective, right? Whether it's an emergency cell, swarm cell, supersedure cell, it doesn't matter. A new queen is emerging in some capacity or another. That queen is not marked. She is small, and she's definitely harder to find than the mated queen. So just be mindful of that. Now, one thing I wanted to kind of throw out there, this is kind of more of like a behavioral type of thing, but a colony will sometimes do this thing, and it's not always. I've seen it. Some colonies don't seem to have much of a reaction at all. I have a study that I came across right before I hit the record button. I haven't had a chance to read it, but I skimmed through it. I'm going to post that in the download section today because it looks like it's an interesting article around the sounds that a queenless colony makes. Now, I've heard colonies where you take the queen out and within an hour or so, there's like a roar to it. It's a completely different audible sound that comes from that queenless hive. That's one thing that you can look for. So obviously, you wouldn't have brood if you didn't have queen. No queen, no brood. This roar, if you happen to hear that, a general agitation, a lack of productivity. There's a lot of things that you'll see when they are queenless. And you heard me mention before about the scenario where I said, where I loaned out a frame to a neighbor that had some open brood on it so they, their colony could make a new queen cell. And of course, I gave away my queen. But that trick, minus the giving away the queen, is a great way to figure out, really where you are. If you take a frame that has eggs and young larvae on it, right? The younger the larva, the better. And you hand that to a friend or you receive that from somebody else and you drop that into a queen right colony, they're not going to do anything with it other than raise the brood. If you drop it into a queenless colony, they will make queen cells from it. So that's a really great, simple, easy way to figure out what your queen status is. Now, I'm not going to do a full review, but in the last episode, we talked about what your options are for requeening. So you can let them requeen by themselves. You can add a mated queen, a queen cell, merge in a nuke, several different approaches and methodologies and things that you can deploy and different tactics you can use if you are definitely queenless. So please go back and listen to episode 144 on that one. And a lot of times there's this thing that came from Brother Adam, and I've mentioned it a few times, but in one of his books, he had said most problems within a beehive can be resolved by either taking something away or adding something to a colony. That's very true in many respects, but sometimes the best thing to do is just wait. Now, I'm hesitant to say that at this time of year because in swarm season, it's okay to wait as long as you don't have a bunch of queen cells, unless you want them to swarm and you just want to wait till it's all over with. But sometimes you can look in there and say, I don't really like what I'm seeing. I don't even really know what I'm seeing. Close up shop and come back in a week. If something happened that is catastrophic with that queen, and hopefully they've taken some action to address it, sometimes coming back in a week after things have had a chance to settle down is your best option. But don't rush to requeen the hive. They may have already started that process on their own. As you know, 2 queens is 1 queen too many. I mean, they will sort it out. And a lot of people do that. They will merge colonies together and just be like, yeah, I don't care. They'll throw 2 colonies together. They're queen right colonies, let them sort it out and move on. I don't like to do that. I prefer to manage the queens individually based on their performance and their history and their genetics and all of that. But you definitely don't want to spend the money, the time, the energy putting a brand new mated queen into a colony that doesn't need one. So don't rush that process. Take your time. I know it's hard to do that. I really do because, you get excited and you're there and you want to solve the problem, or you might not even have the time. Maybe you've got a schedule that you're on. It's a pretty tight schedule and you've got somewhere you got to be. You can't wait around. So do the best you can to work with the bees and let them do what they do naturally. Okay, everybody, as we wrap up for the day here, remember that bees have survived for thousands of years, and despite all the stupid things that people tell us we have to do if we want our bees to survive, 95% of which is completely unnecessary, the bees still manage to survive and persevere. So they are very resilient. They have a lot of redundancy baked into the colony. Honestly, if all you did was treat them for varroa and make sure you're taking care of those stupid hive beetles, keep them under control. If you can give them a warm, dry cavity and you're treating them for varroa, you're giving them space to expand and maybe a little kiss on the cheek every now and then, they're going to be fine. I think it's sometimes when we try to do too much and feel like we really are in control of everything with them that things become problematic. Okay, so check us out at beekeepingfornewbies.com. It's NEWBEES.com. I will post a link to this article that I just mentioned on the download section of that today. If you didn't capture all the details from today or last week's episode 144, don't fear. I'm going to be capturing all of that and posting it in the form of just a brief kind of blog article on bestbeekeepinggear.com. So you can go there and kind of refresh your memory if you forget or you just want to kind of check up again in a week or two. Also, if you want to check us out, youtube.com/@beekeepingfornewbies. You can listen to the podcast over there, check out some videos. We got more things coming up. I'm going to get that video done with the mock inspections this week. And also on the Beekeeping for Newbies homepage, you've got your download section with your nuke plans, your swarm trap plans, and all that other stuff. So, all right, everybody, that's all I got for you today. Take care, be kind to one another, and remember that I love you. There's nothing you can do about it. We'll talk to you soon.